So there's been an influx of comments here on YouTube, a lot of DMs on Instagram asking me various questions about the Genesis. And seeing as I have just hit 190,000 miles on this car, I figured it was a good time to get on camera and kind of update you guys on what's new, what's happening with the Genesis, and answer a few questions in the process. By far, the biggest question I get pretty much like once a week, sometimes multiple times a week, is have you sold the Genesis? Do you still have the Genesis? Where's the Genesis? Blah, 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 blah. No, I haven't sold the Genesis, obviously. I just literally made a feature short film dedicated to this car. I don't know why people think I sell this car all the time. It's still here. I'm driving it right now. I drive it every single day. I have put a shit ton of miles on it, seeing as we're at 190K. So no, I haven't sold it. I still have it. And speaking of still having it, it has been quite the journey owning this car. I've had it for 9 years now. I've put in 160,000 miles of seat time in this car. So I'm just gonna get into it. I'm just gonna kind of update you guys on the modifications. As we all know, the aftermarket isn't a vast variety to choose from. Just to quickly go over my modifications, the G80 Sport wheels, still awesome. The Indy 500s, still highly recommend those. They've lasted for a while. I probably have to change a set soon. The Brembo swap from the Genesis Coupe, pretty unpopular mod, I would say, but it's probably my favorite. The most performance-oriented modification that you can do on these cars is to swap them for the Genesis Coupe R-Spec Brembo brakes. It is seriously one of the best modifications you can do to this car. The exhaust, remember, I have a MagnaFlow catback and I chopped it up to put in some valves. I usually take the valves out and put block off plate during the winter because living in the Midwest, it's a very corrosive environment. I didn't do it this past year because I got lazy and old and I hate working on my back now. So it only took one winter here in Chicago and it rusted through the Y pipe. I had to cut out the Y pipe. I think I have a video on this channel actually. I'll link it down below of my makeshift repair, but yeah, it's basically just a patched up MagnaFlow exhaust system as of right now. So I don't have the cutouts. The coilovers, this is a big issue with this car right now. I don't know if you can kind of feel it through the camera, but it's a very bumpy ride. I'm pretty sure one of the coilovers is blown, or it's just not dampening as well as they used to, because I'm pretty sure now I've hit over 100K miles on these BC Racing coilovers. The problem is I can't even take them out because, you know, I've ran them through the winter the last couple winters and they've literally rusted into place. I've tried to get under there and get them out to no avail, and I've only even attempted the rear, so I probably have to rebuild the rear, maybe get a whole new carrier, spring carrier assembly. I don't know what to do, but they're rusted into place. It's really annoying. I just want to put the OEM shocks back in and the springs. Now that I have the Corvette, I don't need this car to be stiff and low and kind of performance oriented. I have the Vet for that now, and I just really want to get these old coilovers out of this car and replace it with the OEM suspension that I have actually hanging on my wall. They're like brand new. I don't even know how many miles are on them. I can't, it's probably not even 50,000 miles on the OE suspension, but I have to figure out how to get these rusted coilovers out of this car. But that's the update on the coilovers. Just be mindful if you live in a corrosive environment that could potentially be a big issue. The backup camera, not really a modification, but a repair. I don't know if you guys remember, we did a whole video. It was such a pain in the ass to replace because you have to take the trunk shell off, and it was just, the clips are so annoying to work with. We found that a lot of water and salt and stuff gets in there and corrodes the camera. So what we did was tape it up with electrical tape to kind of prevent that from happening. And I can attest to this day, I don't even know, I think that was like over a year ago, maybe even 2 years, I don't even remember, but the camera's still good. I highly recommend, if you're going to replace your camera, to wrap it up to kind of protect it from all the elements, because a lot of shit does get back there. So now for the problems. I do have a full dedicated buyer's guide where I go into depth about all of my problems with this car, how to fix them, how much it costs. It's a very in-depth video. I'll leave that link in the description. This one's more a quick little update for you guys, but my parking sensors still don't work. The sunroof still doesn't work. It's too expensive to even worry about. I hate sunroofs anyway. I pulled the fuse and never even thought about it. My door locks still don't work because I didn't do anything about them. But in that last video at 150K miles, only the fronts wouldn't work. Now occasionally the rear door locks don't work. I have to figure that out because it is such a royal pain in the ass. But those stopped working, you know, probably 170,000 miles, and the fronts stopped working at like 110,000 miles. But the door locks seem to be very weak in these cars. Just keep that in mind. Mine still don't work, and now it's kind of migrating to the back, so it's quite annoying. Did you feel that? It wasn't even that big of a bump. A new development is my center DIS knob, navigation, multimedia knob thing does not work. I click a million times and it just won't get me out of the caution screen. I don't really use this anyway. I plug in my phone and, you know, the volume still works and the skip buttons work and all that. I just can't get past the caution screen. So that's a new development for this car. That kind of, it was intermittent in the beginning and now it just completely just won't work. I have took this all apart and cleaned the contacts. I think I spilled coffee in here once and whatever, but since then, I haven't spilled anything. And it won't work. I'll click it 100,000 times and it won't get me past the caution screen. So that's not really annoying because I don't use it, but that's something that did also go wrong. Also, going back to the backup camera, when we found out there was a ton of corrosion and like moisture back there, I have noticed that the tail lights accumulated some condensation. So that's kind of annoying. And the paint, another big problem with this car. The paint has only gotten worse. I didn't repaint it. It's very expensive to repaint it. But I'll put in a clip. It is what it is. I mentioned in that video that it's very non-durable, brittle paint, and it has taken a toll. It is what it is. Now for the second biggest question that I get is reliability. How has the car been? You beat the crap out of it all the time. You have 190,000 miles. You've had it for 9 years. What is the reliability like? Well, the motor's still good. Full throttle. Still good. Transmission still shifts well. A lot of questions actually about the transmission. I know there's a lot of talk on the transmissions in these cars that they're made of glass, they're very weak, they break all the time. I'll tell you, I've only took this car once to the dealer for a transmission. That was to change the transmission fluid, and that was at 100,000 miles. That is the only time that this car has ever had a tranny flush and replace in my ownership, and I'm guaranteeing that they didn't do it before I owned this car. And the transmission has been just fine. I've heard a ton of horror stories about the transmission, but you guys know I don't baby this car. It shifts just fine. Although it's not the most responsive transmission, but that's just the nature of this transmission. It's totally fine. I've had no issues of weird stuff happening. It is what it is. It's just a, I wouldn't even say decent transmission. It is a transmission. And I haven't had any issues with it. The motor does still burn oil. I would probably say it burns more oil now than it did before. I think before I was like calculating about a quart every 5,000 miles between oil changes. Now, because I check it every couple weeks just to make sure, and I'm finding myself putting more oil in more frequently. So just the nature of the game, things get old, worn out. It is what it is. I've never cared, to be honest. It's just another maintenance thing. A lot of GDI engines burn oil these days. You can hear my voice. It's a particularly bad road, and these coilovers aren't doing much of anything anymore. That's it for the oil consumption for this car. It does burn more oil, I would say probably over a quart. I don't know, a quart and a quarter, quart and a half between 5,000 miles every oil change. So, you know, doesn't bother me. Interior. So it still looks really good in here. Not a lot of fading or cracking much of anywhere. There is a little crack here in the armrest. We all know that the armrest material is very thin, not a lot of padding, and I guess my ashy elbow kind of, you know, was too much for it, and it kind of cracked here. There is a little piece of trim around the mirror control, the ring, that has flaked off. Other than that, it's pretty much like the seats are good, all the dash. The buttons aren't faded or have like residue on them, you know, like when you have like oily fingers touching them for years and years and years, they like progressively get like discolored. None of that in this entire interior, to be honest. It's usually just me in the car, so the back seats still look brand new. But other than that, the interior is still pretty good. It held up pretty well over the years. Another thing is people ask me like what it costs to maintain this car. That seems to be a pretty common question as well. Doesn't take much at all. All I do with this car is change the cabin air filter and the engine air filter once a year. Oil every 5,000 miles with synthetic. It costs me like 80 bucks to do it myself every like 3 months, 3-4 months. I did brakes a couple times. You know, every 3 years I'll flush the brake fluid, air filters, oil changes, and occasionally brakes. That's pretty much it. I will say at 100,000 miles, I did do the serpentine belt because the alternator went out. That was the only thing that ever went out on this car from factory was the alternator, but that's a common thing, that's a wear and tear item. I did also do a coolant flush at 100,000 miles. This car doesn't need much. It's a very reliable, low maintenance car. Now for the big question, selling or not selling? I've contemplated this back and forth for like 2 years, more so when I got the Vet. You know, this car isn't worth anything on the market, so I guess I'll keep it. I don't owe anything on it. It doesn't take a lot to maintain. It's still reliable. It's very comfortable on smooth roads. So there's no need to sell it, so I won't sell it. I'm gonna keep it, probably drive it until she doesn't want to live anymore. I do plan on to keep making short films with this car. I want this car to kind of be a staple in that kind of series, because obviously this car is kind of synonymous with the Xtalgic name, so I kind of want to incorporate this car into that whole lore that I'm trying to do. And again, if you want to watch that, link in the description. But this car, for the foreseeable future, is not going anywhere. And speaking of not going anywhere, we just hit 190,000 miles. So we're approaching 200K, and there are probably a few things that will need to change, right? Like the alternator may go out again at 100,000 miles. That seems to be their lifespan. More than likely do a coolant flush again, because I did that at 100,000 miles. Oh, I forgot. Spark plugs, I also did that at 100,000 miles, but that was like, that's how infrequent this car needs spark plugs. Every 100,000 miles, I forgot about them, but I did do that as well. But at 200K, I'll probably change the spark plugs again. Super easy. I'll probably flush the brake fluid again, do the serpentine belt if I do an alternator, and that's it. 190,000 miles and counting. So this was more of a quick little update video of the car. If you want a full in-depth review of cost, maintenance, literally everything that's gone wrong with this car, I'll leave that link in the description. And if you love the Genesis, you'll love it in the Driver X short film series that we're making. I'll leave that link down in the description as well.